Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome back. Shlomo, you're upside down.
Good morning.
It's a bit confusing. All right. There we go. Okay. Morning, welcome back. So we are nearly at the end here. We're on Daf Kaf Daled Amud Alech, Masechet Makkot. We finished. The Gemara went through, you remember, so we saw this idea of 613 mitzvot, and then we saw different Nevi'im reduced the number of mitzvot to different reduced the number of mitzvot to a smaller number of principles in order to focus on. So David HaMelech reduced them to 11, and then we go down to 6, to 3, to 2, until eventually Habakkuk comes down and reduced them to 1, and he says, Tzadik v'emanato yichya. Okay, so we went through that. The next section in the Gemara now is a somewhat common theme in terms of going through of reducing that was there originally. The Gemara is now going to tell us that there were 4 gzerot, so to speak, that Moshe Rabbeinu made, and the Nevi'im came and cancelled them, so to speak. Again, it's not that Moshe Rabbeinu actually made these gzerot; they're written in the Torah. It's not that the Nevi'im actually cancelled them, but they maybe interpreted them in a different way. We'll see exactly what it means. So if you have a look, we're on the Gemara now. We're near the bottom of Daf Kaf Daled. Probably, let's say, about 10 lines from the bottom. And it says, in the middle of the line, it says, Amar Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina. Amar Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina, Arba Gzerot Gazal Moshe Rabbeinu al Yisrael, Bal Arba'a Nevi'im Ubitlum. It says the Gemara, it says Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina, there were 4 gzerot which Moshe Rabbeinu decreed on Israel, so to speak, and these 4 Nevi'im came and they annulled them. So what does that mean? So it's going to tell us about 4 different prophecies, 4 prophecies which we have in the Torah, in the Chumash, said by Moshe Rabbeinu, right? Obviously told him by Hashem, but 4 things which sound extremely harsh, and we're going to see that the Nevi'im come along and make them a little bit softer, so to speak. So we say like this. We say, Amar Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina, Arba gzerot gazal Moshe Rabbeinu al Yisrael, Ba'u arba'a nevi'im ubitlum. Moshe Amar, Vayishkon Yisrael betach badad ein Yaakov. Okay, so what does that mean? Says in the Torah, Vayishkon Yisrael betach badad ein Yaakov, that Israel will dwell safely. Right, ein Yaakov. What does Ein Yaakov mean? So if you have a look at the Rivan, right on the top of the left side of the page, just before it changes to Rabbeinu Gershom. So it's actually in the Emshech, but you see the Rivan, the Dibur HaMalchus says Chadal Na. He says Ota bracha shama Moshe. Says this bracha which Moshe Rabbeinu said. What does it mean? Vayishkon Yisrael betach badad Ein Yaakov. That's the pasuk. So he explains as follows: Klomar, Eimatai Yishkon Yisrael betach. When will Israel dwell safely in tranquility? Right? When? The answer is Ein Yaakov. In other words, Sheyut Tzadikim ke'Ein Yaakov. So if you'll be like Yaakov Avinu, so then if you'll be on that level of tzidkut, so then you will merit and you will dwell safely. So you can see on the one hand it's a bracha, on the other hand it's what kind of a bracha is that? How are we meant to get to the level of Yaakov? We discussed this previously. Where we saw that David HaMelech came and reduced the 613 to 11, and the first one was Alech Tamim, and he said, Alech Tamim, this is Avram Avinu. He said, how can we possibly be like Avram Avinu? So we can't. We can try and emulate, we can try and follow in the ways, etc. But here, it's saying when will that be? Ein Yaakov. When you'll be like Yaakov. So that is that's the Gzerah. Comes along, Ba Amos, Ubitla. Comes along Amos, and he cancels it. He goes, Chadal na mi yakum Yaakov. Chadal na mi yakum Yaakov, etc. Right. Actually, if you see the whole pasuk here on the side, it says, right, it says, Chadal na mi yakum Yaakov, ki katonhi. So it says over here, the Rivan, again, he says, Mi Yakum Yaakov, He says, Mi yuchal liot chasid ki Yaakov ki katonu. That's the rest of the pasuk. It says, who can be a chasid, who can be pious like Yaakov Avinu? Katonu. What does that mean? It's small. Ktanim hem atovim sheyu tzadikim ki Yaakov. Meaning it's very, very few in number. Ktanim. How many people could possibly be tzadikim like Yaakov? So in other words, Amos comes along and he reinterprets this idea. He says, Chadalna, meaning stop from the whatever punishment or whatever difficulties that you're going to have. Hadran is almost says, Kiviyachol said towards the Kadosh Baruch Hu. Says, Mi Yaakov, that's not fair. Who can be like Yaakov? So that is the first Gzerah that was cancelled. Uchtev, number 2. And the continuation of that is Uchtev Nicham Hashem al Zot. Meaning it's very nice that Amos said that, but how do we know that it was accepted? So yes, that's the next pasuk that tells us Nicham Hashem al Zot, that Hashem accepted that, sort of changed his mind, Kiviyachol. Obviously Hashem can't change his mind, but that's what it's coming to express. So that is number 1. Number 2, it says Moshe Amar Uvagoyim Haem Lo Talgia. Right, when you will be in exile, you'll be amongst those nations. You won't have any rest. So that is the second one. Ba Yirmiyahu ve'amar haloch lahalgio Yisrael. Comes along Yirmiyahu and says no. It says haloch lahalgio, so you can go and you can have rest. Says over here, this is the first comment of Rabbeinu Gershom. We're now till the end of the Masechet, which is not very long, but we don't have the commentary of Rivan anymore. We now have Rabbeinu Gershom, and he says, "Alech la'gio Yisrael shehei lahem menucha begalutan." That even in their galut, they could have a certain level of rest, of tranquility, I suppose. Okay, so that's number 2. Number 3, Moshe Amar, "Pokei lavon avot al banim." Right, so we have a pasuk that says, we've mentioned this in different contexts as well. Means that he brings he counts the sins of the fathers on the children. Okay, Chazal explained this means obviously where the banim are continuing in the path of the fathers. So if they we mentioned a great length last week. We spoke about Chizkiyahu HaMelech. So Chizkiyahu HaMelech is a good example. His father was very, very evil, but Chizkiyahu himself was a great tzaddik. He was a great tzaddik, and he did lots of good things. So he would not be punished for if the son, if the descendants are Choser B'Tshuva and they don't carry on the same way of their fathers, so then they will not get punished for that. But if they carry on, so they'll be punished for the previous generations' iniquities as well. That is Pokei Avon Avot Al Banim. Ba Yechezkel Ubitla. Yechezkel comes along and he counts it. He said, no, HaNefesh HaChotet Hi Tamut. It's only the one who is sinning themselves that is going to die, that is going to be punished. So that is number 3. And number 4 says Moshe Amar Ve'ibadtem Bagoyim. Right, when you go into exile, and you will be lost. You'll be lost. You'll be dispersed, scattered amongst the nations, and that's going to be the end of you. You go into exile, you won't come back. That is Ve'ibadtem Bagoyim. So by Yeshayahu V'amar, etc. Right, so that is a pasuk. We said in our tefillot, we said in Rosh Hashanah. This is one of the pasukim of Shofrot. It says the full pasuk is not quoted in the Gemara, but you'll see it on the side. So right, the Mefashim point out over here, by the way, that this pasuk was Be'eretz Ashul v'nidachim be'eretz Mitzrayim is not just geographical places. And yes, so historically, these were different exiles that we had in the land of Ashur and in the land of Mitzrayim. But what is Ashur and Mitzrayim? They represent things. The word Ashur comes from Osher, which is happiness, which is wealth. Right? Mitzrayim comes from the language of Mitzar. So there are different types of exiles in the Jewish people. There are places throughout most of history, we've been exiled. It's been very, very difficult. There's been poverty, and there's been persecution, and there's been suffering, and there's been nothing. That is the exile of Mitzrayim, so to speak. And then you have a type of exile where things are not so bad on the surface. In fact, things are very good, and things are very comfortable. And there's lots of wealth, and there's lots of material wealth, and all the things that you need. So that's what it says at the end of the day. Both of those types of places, ultimately, that's not where you're meant to be as a Jew. You're meant to be here. You're not meant to be there. And that's where Hashem will bring us back from. Rav Kook has a famous drasha on this as well, which he gave one Rosh Hashanah in the Chur Vashul, It was, I believe it was the year just after Hitler and Shmuel came to power. And Rav Kook got up and he gave a drasha. He spoke about Takab Shofar Gadol. The truth is that in every day in our tefillot, we say Takab Shofar Gadol Lecheroteinu. So Rav Kook asked the question, he says, what is a shofar gadol? Like, what, we're going to have a small shofar. Why does it have to be a big shofar? What does that mean? Why does it need to be a shofar gadol? So he explained that when it comes to the halachot of shofar, so on Rosh Hashanah, there are three types of shofarot that you might have, halachically speaking. You have the shofar of Ayil, the shofar of the ram's horn, which is mitzvah min hamuvchar. According to the Rambam, that's the only shofar which is kosher. According to the other Rishonim, it's not the only one, but it's certainly mitzvah min hamuvchar. It's the best of the best, top of the top. Then you have a shofar of any other kosher animal, which is fine. According to most of the Rishonim, it's kosher. According to the Shulchan Aruch, it's kosher. You could say the bracha and you can blow that shofar if that's all you have. And then he says, Rav Kook, there is a third type of shofar, of a non-kosher animal. He says, what happens if a person doesn't have a shofar and they're waiting? It's Rosh Hashanah, you're getting close to Shkia, you're waiting for somebody to bring you the shofar. It doesn't come. You don't have it. All you have is a shofar that is of a be'emah tme'ah. So such a shofar, lekatchila, certainly you cannot blow with it. He says that if you have nothing else, you can blow, to fulfill the mitzvah, but on such a shofar, one doesn't say a bracha. Such a shofar, one would not say a bracha. So he says, so Rav Kook, just like you have three shofarot of Rosh Hashanah, you have the three shofarot of Geulah. He says, why did Jews come back to Eretz Yisrael? So it could be you have the shofar of Ayil, you have the which is the mitzvah min hamuvchar, bring us back. Why? Because this is Geulah, because this is to fulfill the mitzvot. Mitzvot lo pa'aretz, come back and build the Beit HaMikdash. Ultimately, this is why we want to be here. That is number one. He says, number two, if not that, there's a shofar that calls people, call it Jewish nationalism, call it Zionism, whatever you want to say, not necessarily l'shem shamayim, but still for those positive reasons of Jewish people in a nation, that is still something which is kosher. That is still something you say a bracha on. He says, but if it's getting late and it's getting to the end of the day and it's getting to the end of the galut and you're not coming, you haven't heard the shofar. And he says this in the Chuvah just after Hitler's come to power. And he says, then we have the shofar of the non-kosher. And that is a shofar that calls us, and that is a shofar we don't say a bracha on that. And then Rav Kook began sobbing, and then he stepped down and he finished his drasha. So he says, we daven to Hashem, we say Takab Shofar Gadol. He says, ultimately we'll come back. Ultimately the shofar will come that will call us, whatever it may be, but we want it to be the shofar Gadol, we want it to be for the right reasons and not chas v'chalila for the wrong. Okay, so that is the idea. It says it's Takab Shofar Gadol. In other words, it said in the Torah. It said in the Torah, what it said, you'll be lost in the nations, and then it says, meaning that those who are lost will come back. In other words, you won't be lost. So that is the softening of that decree as well. So now, so what we see four different nivuot. What the way the Mefashim explain over here is that these four things which were said in the Torah was given the expression of the Midat Hadin, but the Nevi'im came along and explained them by the Midat HaRachamim. That's a different, giving a different interpretation on each of these four things. Says now the Gemara says Amar Rav Mistafina Mehaikra. Rav says, I was afraid of this pasuk. Okay, so mistafina, this is a word which appears very often in the Rishonim and the Achronim. Many times, Rishon will make a commentator will say something, and he'll say lulei de mistafina, meaning if I wasn't scared, I would say such and such. In other words, this is the interpretation. This is the interpretation all the Rishonim have come along and given to it. How can I go along and say something different? How can I go and say against the Rambam or the Ramban or whatever it is? So many times the Rishonim will say lulei de mistafina. It means if I wasn't afraid. So if I wasn't scared. So mistafina means to be afraid. So Marav mistafina me'akra. I was afraid of this pasuk. Ve'vatim baguyim. I was afraid of this pasuk that says you'll be lost in the nations. Why was Rav scared? Did Rav not learn the Gemara? The Gemara said ve'vatim baguyim, but then we saw Yeshayahu said ve'abahu yitakab shofar gadol. So maybe the point is that Rav is saying like this. Maybe saying that pasuk that says. Did you see the Rabbeinu Gershom? One moment. Rabbeinu Gershom says, "B'shofar gadol, etc." He says, "Ba'u avdim Ba'aretz melamed shelo yiyu avodim ben avdei kochavim. Meaning to teach you that they won't be lost amongst those nations forever, but they will come back. So you could say that this is talking about the Jewish people as a whole, meaning there won't be a situation when Yeshua is coming to tell us is that it's impossible. Jewish people will not be wiped out. It will not be that we'll all go into exile and they will never come back. No, that is impossible. That will not happen. But certain communities, certain galuyot, it's true, it's possible. They could go and they could be wiped out, and they'll be in those places, and they won't come back. Certain individuals may go and they won't come back. So it says Rav. So I was worried. I was worried about this pasuk. I know what the Gemara said. I know what Moshe Rabbeinu said. I know what Yeshayahu said. Yeshayahu was talking about the Jewish people, Bofen Klali. But what about me? And what about my community? Maybe we're part of that. Maybe we won't come back. So therefore, Amarav Mistafina Ma'ikra Levatim Bagoyim. So Matkiv la Rav Papa. So Rav Papa answers back, right? We'd expect at this point, the point is the Gemara does not come back and say, oh, well, this is the answer we already said. No, meaning Rav has, seemingly Rav has a point. So Matkiv la Rav Papa attacks and he says, Dilmak Aveda Hamit Bakeshet. Okay, so what Rav Papa is saying over here is that the word Aveda is a lost object. Something gets lost. So there are two ways in which something can get lost. Something can get lost, right, and sort of lost forever. For example, we find the Mishnah in Gittin talks about Sfina she'avda bayam, a ship that gets lost at sea or gets lost. You're never going to find it. It's gone. It's disappeared. Or you can have something. You can have an object which is a lost object, but then you go and you find it, right, and it comes back. You see all the time on right Hashavat Aveda. So he says Rav Papa, where it says, the word, because the difficulty is in the language, it says v'avatem baguyim, this verb meaning you'll be lost, right? So maybe it's a lost object, which is actually you're going to go and find it, right? Tichtiv ta'iti kaseh oved bakesh avdecha. We have this pasuk that says pasuk in Tehillim. It says I am right like a lost sheep. But seek me out. In other words, not something that you give up hope on, but something that will still be found. It says Rabbeinu Gershom kabedamit bakeshet v'nimtzeit lachazman, and it's going to be found again after a certain period of time. It's not lost forever. So he says no. So look at the end of the pasuk, which says va'achla etchem eretz oivechem. So hang on. So you wanted to say that from the fact that the pasuk says "V'avatem sham." Let's have a look at the full pasuk. Small letter kuf. So this is right. This is in Vayikra Kafvav Lamed Chet. V'avatem baguyim. V'achla etchem eretz oivechem. You'll be lost amongst the nations, and the land where you are of your enemies will consume you. So you want to say, okay. So originally Rab says I was afraid of the pasuk because there's v'avatem baguyim. It says you'll be lost. So the Papa, no, maybe it doesn't mean you'll be lost completely. You'll be lost, but you'll still be found. Okay, but then the pasuk continues. It says, the land will consume you. You'll be eaten up. That seems to be pretty final, right? So what do we say there? So let me say for the says the Gemara Matkif la Marzutra. Says Marzutra, no, dilma ka'achilat kishuin v'diluin. Certain types of vegetables. What is it about eating these achilat kishuin v'diluin that's going to be different? So says Rabbeinu Gershom over here on the side. He says ka'achilat kishuin v'diluin she'ochlin miktzatan u'miktzatan ein ochlin. Meaning these are large vegetables, so you eat part of them and part of them you don't eat. Part of them you leave behind. So it says v'achilatchem, you'll be consumed again. Some of you will be consumed, but some of you won't, and some of you will come back. Okay, that is so. That is the end of that, and those are these four gzerot of Moshe Rabbeinu. So now, says the Gemara, we're going to get into a couple of very famous stories, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with. It says Kfar Ayah, Rabban Gamliel, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Yoshua, Rabbi Akiva, Ma'achin Baderech. Okay, so we have these Tanaim, Rabban Gamliel, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Yoshua, Rabbi Akiva, they're walking along the way. V'sham'u kol hamona shel Romi. Right, so they hear the voice They hear the sound. Kol hamana is like a sound of like where there are lots of people, like hamon, right? You hear the sound of the crowd in of Rome, right? ושמעו כל המנה של רומי מפלטה, ברחוק 120 mil, meaning there were a distance of 120 mil from the palace, so to speak, of Rome, and they heard miplatero, says Rabbi Kenigsberg, means Bayit Shel Romi, the home of the Roman government or whatever it was, and vitchilu bochin, they begin to cry. Right. So what is the connection between this and the previous stories in the Gemara? So as we saw previously, where there was discussion in terms of even reducing the mitzvot, we saw according to one version, the Yalkut Shimoni, already there was discussion between Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Akiva, where he was crying and he was laughing. And if so, that's clearly the continuation of this. And if not, it does seem to move on from this discussion we have about being lost amongst the Goyim and being consumed. So that would be sort of the connection to this. So it says they began to cry. Rabbi Akiva Masechet, and Rabbi Akiva is laughing. We're now 2 lines from the bottom of the page. Amrulo, mipnei ma ata masechek. They said to him, Akiva, why are you laughing? Amar lahem v'atem mipnei ma atem bochim. And he said to them, why are you crying? Amrulo, halalu kushim shemishtachavim latzavim u'makatrim la'avodat kochavim yoshvin be'atach ve'ashket. They said that they again, this is at the time, during the time of the Churban and during the time of the wars against the Romans, and the Jewish situation is that, unlike today, is not so good, to put it lightly. And they hear this, they hear these crowds, and they hear just normal Roman life going on, and they're crying. And I say to him, why? Because halalu kushim, these are really descendants of Cush. In the Torah was cursed. Shemishtachavim latzavim. They are idolaters. They bow down to trees and to plants. Right? To makatrim la'avodat kochavim, and they offer up incense and sacrifices to avodah zarah. Yoshvin betach v'ashket. They are sitting all. Everything is fine and good and well with them. V'anachnu beit adom raglei Elokeinu zolf ba'esh. And us, the footstool of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so to speak, the temple, the Beit HaMikdash, is burnt, has gone up in flames. Right? How can we not, if that's the situation, how can we not cry?
Rabbi?
Yeah.
Excuse me. Where were they?
Where were they? So it says that they heard so I'm not sure exactly where they were. The Gemara doesn't say. But it says they were, we'll see the next story is going to be very clear. The next story is going to be where they're walking and they see the place of the Mikdash. What it tells us, so 120 mil from this platarin of Rome, from this, I guess, the seat of governance. I'm not sure exactly.
So they were not in Eretz Yisrael.
Again, it's not completely clear. Meaning, what is it talking about? I don't know if it means necessarily the center of the empire, or probably not. Probably they had proxies that were somewhere closer, which is what they hear. It's not completely clear exactly where they were. Yeah, it's a fair question. But so they are right. So they are crying, and they say, right, how can it be that these people, and as we have the Beit HaMikdash, which is up in flames, are we not going to cry? Says Rabbi Akiva. This is the less famous story, but the next one's very famous. He says, that's why I'm laughing. He says, so this is a language we find in Chazal in a number of places. I think Rawan mentioned in Perek a couple of weeks ago, right? He says, this is why I'm laughing. It says, if this is the way it is for those who transgress, or those who go against his will, so for those who do fulfill his will, how much more so? In other words, if this is these people, these Rashaim, who go against the Torah and go against Hashem's people, and they have all this prosperity and security, and so to speak, in this world, right? This is the reward that they're getting now. So imagine how much more we who actually are following in the ways of the Torah when it comes to Olam Haba, how much more. This is an analogy for us to see how much more we will get the schar from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Right? That's the point. So that is the first story of the Tanaim walking along. The second one now, which I think is safe to say that this is a famous Gemara. He says, "Shuv pa'am achat hayu olin Yerushalayim." Another time, here we know they were coming to Yerushalayim. Kevan shehigiu lahar tzofim, and they got to Har Tzofim, is the place from which they could see Har Habayit. Kar'u bigdehem, they tore their clothes. Kevan shehigiu lahar Habayit ra'u shu'al she'yatza mibeit kodshei hakodashim. When they came to Har Habayit, they saw a fox that was exiting from the Beit Kodesh HaKodashim. Some of the Mefarshim point out here, why specifically a fox? So the fox is the animal which represents what is cunning and is sly and is maybe somewhat tricky, maybe somewhat treacherous. So why was the Beit HaMikdash destroyed? The Beit HaMikdash was destroyed. We know there are many reasons. Discuss them soon. Coming up to Shabbat. This is the time of year. That's a different Gemarot give us different explanations, but probably the most well-known one is the Gemara in Yom Adaftet, which tells us that Beit Rishon was destroyed because of Avodah Zarah Gilui Arayot and Shfichut Damim, but Beit Sheni was because of Sinat Chinam. But you always remember Sinat Chinam. It's much more convenient to talk about Sinat Chinam, which is Ben Adam Chavero, which is the second Beit HaMikdash. We can't forget. First, Beit HaMikdash was destroyed also because of things which were Ben Adam Makom, right? Avodah Zarah and Shfichut Damim and Gilui Arayot. Those are not any less significant. Those are the three things we know as well that one is required to give their life up rather than transgress. But in any event, Sinat Chinam was by Cheni that they didn't treat each other properly. The fox maybe represents an animal which is not the most honest and not the most scrupulous in its dealings with others in terms of its cunning and its slyness, etc. So that is maybe a hint to that idea of correcting the Sinat Chinam. We've probably mentioned it here before as well, but I'll just mention also the Netziv in his Akdamat to Sefer Bereshit, a very, very fundamental work where he talks about this idea of Beit Sheni and why it was destroyed, and the idea of that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Yashar. And he says that he says in the times of Beit Sheni, which was true because of Sinat Chinam, he says essentially they were all tzaddikim and they were all chasidim and they were all Yirei Shamayim and everything. But what was the problem? The problem was they looked at anybody. We know Jewish people is very fractured, very splintered at that time. Says the Netziv, essentially, he says anybody who wasn't exactly like them, right? Anybody who wore a different colored kippah, and anybody who had a slightly different political opinion or whatever it was, they looked at them and they said, he's got to be at Stuki. And he says that was not, they were actually tzaddikim, but they were not yesharim in their dealings with other people. And he says a language which, if the Netziv didn't say it, we couldn't say it. But he says, Ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu sovel tzaddikim ka'ele. These are not the kinds of tzaddikim that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants. He wants you to be straight. He wants you to be yashar, first and foremost. So in any event, they were there, and they saw the fox coming out of the Kodesh Kodashim, and hitchilu hein bochin from Rabbi Akiva Matzachek. And if it wasn't so well known, it would be shocking. But that's what the Gemara says. It says they began to cry, all the Tanaim, and Rabbi Akiva began to laugh. So they said, right, why are you laughing? Answered back, good rabbi. He said, answers back a question with a question. He says, why are you crying? They say, how can we not cry? Yet this time they bring a pasuk to prove it. It says, the Torah says, Hazara karev yumat, anybody who's foreign, anybody who's a non-Kohen, who's not allowed to enter that place, will die. That is the sanctity of Har Habayit. And now we see that foxes are there. We're not going to cry. Answers back, Rabbi Akiva says, that is precisely why I'm laughing. Va'ida li'adim nemanim et Uriah Kohen v'Tzchaya ben Yeverachyahu. So the pasuk says that I'll give you witnesses faithful witnesses. This is the pasuk in Yeshayahu. Who are the witnesses? Of Uriah Kohen and Zechariah ben Yevarachyahu. So what is Uriah and Zechariah? What do they have to do with one another? V'chi ma'anyan Uriah tells Zechariah, Uriah mikdash rishon, Zechariah mikdash sheni. Says, what is Uriah and Zechariah got to do? There are different people with different time periods. Uriah is in the mikdash rishon, Zechariah is in mikdash sheni. And atala katuv nevuato shel Zechariah b'nevuato shel Uriah. Rather, the pasuk links the two together. It juxtaposes the nevuah of Uriah together with the nevuah of Zechariah to teach it right. B'Uriah where it says lachen biglalchem tzion sadeh techelash. Because of you, it says that Tzion will be plowed over like a field. This is obviously referring to Yerushalayim, referring to Makom HaMikdash. Now that pasuk, by the way, that is a pasuk from Sefer Micha. What's that got to do with Uriah? So we'll look at that in just a moment. But that is what the Gemara over here refers to as the prophecy of Uriah, the prophecy of Churban. And B'Zechariah ktiv od yeshvu zkenim uzkenot b'rchovot Yerushalayim. And that is the famous pasuk from Zechariah talking about the redemption. So how time will come once again, people will fill the streets of Yerushalayim. So Ad Shalonit Kama. So Rabbi Akiva gives his answer. Just before that, let's look at Tosfot, the last Tosfot here of the Masechet. He says, "B'Uriah ktiv lachen v'glachem tzion sadeh techelash." Says Tosfot kasher. Wait a minute. De'ah b'chol hamikra. If you go through in Sefer Malachim, you do find Uriah Kohen and you find his prophecy, but this pasuk, which the Gemara quotes, is not the nevuah of Uriah. This is from the nevuah of Micha. V'yesh lomar, t'samicha de'ita b'sefer Yirmiyah, shenitnabe Yirmiyah al puranut, v'nitkabtzu hakohanim v'neviim la'orgo mipnei she'am medaber puranut. Okay, he says this could be part of the way to understand this is in Sefer Yirmiyahu. We find where Yirmiyahu comes and he gives his prophecy. Yirmiyahu was not a very popular prophet. Right? When you're a prophet of doom, quite literally, so people don't like you. Right? That's where he came and he was warning and he gave them all these prophecies of Puranot, and he was put in jail and there was a lot of he suffered a lot because of it. It says they wanted to kill him. Remember at the time of the Nevi'im as well. So you had the true prophets and you had false prophets. And we have this whole discussion. Tanakh tells us about Hananiah ben Azur was one of the false prophets. So it's much the false prophets. You can imagine when you come along and you say to people, Hashem says, "Don't worry, everything's going to be fine." There's not that's much more appealing to believe in. Right? This is why the Rambam in Hilchot Yesodei Torah goes through and gives us a whole section and in a number of places describes how do we know when a prophet is genuine and what are the tests and what are the signs, etc. Because oftentimes the prophet comes to tell you things which are very harsh. It's a very harsh rebuke. It's there ultimately for our good. It's there to help us improve our ways. But people don't want to listen to that. People don't want to hear criticism. They want to hear good things. So they did not like what Yirmiyahu had to come and tell them. And they wanted to lock him up. They wanted to kill him. ואמרו להם השרים, אין אנו מסכימים, שהרי מיכה דיבר מפורענות ולא נהרג וגם אוריה. So there were those who came along and said no, that they came to protect Yirmiyahu, and they said we've found that there have been other times where we have other prophets who tell Puranot as well, such as the case of Micha, such as the case of Uriah. In other words, says Tosfot, mashma shedavar Uriah kmo Micha, that from there it sounds like Micha and Uriah actually said the same thing. Uma paranot davar Micha hu krazeh vave kmo shediber Uriah. Okay, so it could be that although we don't have it explicitly in the pasuk that it tells us, but we know that Uriah already had said the same thing, and Micha was repeating that prophecy, and that's why it's called over here the nevuah of Uriah, as opposed to the nevuah of Micha. Okay, so that is lachem v'lachem tzion sadeh techlash b'Zechariah ktiv od yeshvu zkenim v'zkenot b'rchovot Yerushalayim. So ad shelo nitkayma nevuato shel Uriah, hayiti mityareh Says Rabbi Akiva, so long as the prophecy of Uriah had not been fulfilled, I was worried that the prophecy of Zechariah would not be fulfilled either. What do you mean? I was worried that what Rabbi Akiva only believed in half of it. He wasn't sure if the Navi was telling the truth or not. So it might mean that he understood that it was only after the prophecies of the Churban were fulfilled completely that only then the prophecies of rebuilding would then become complete. Or maybe that the Nevuah of Zechariah was referring to something which had already taken place in the past, but he wasn't sure that it was something for the future. And once he saw that the destruction had taken place to that extent, so then he understood that the rebuilding would take place as well. This is similar. We have a halachic concept when it comes to the Malachot of Shabbat. So we know that the Malachot need to be constructive. It's only when you have Melechet Machshevet that it is going to be an Isur Torah. Rabbanan came along and added other cases as well. But one of the exemptions from an Isur Torah of a Melacha on Shabbat is Mekalkel, something which destroys. So there are a number of Melachot where we have a difficulty. You have, for example, there is a Melacha of destroying, right? There's a Melacha of Boneh, which is building, and there's a Melacha of Soter, which is of destroying. So, but that is surely by definition, or you have a Melacha of ripping, or of cutting, of tearing, right? By definition, that seems to be something which is a destructive Melacha, not a constructive Melacha. So that's why in the Mishnah, which lists the Melachot, the Melacha is Boneh, and the Melacha is Soter al menat livnot. It's destroying in order to build. If I have a building and I need to tear it down to redig the foundations to dig a bigger building, so that would be something which is a melacha on Shabbat. So I heard the explanation once that the same thing over here. How are these two prophecies linked? It's not that there happens to be a prophecy of destruction and there happens to be a prophecy of rebuilding. Really, in this case, the destruction is part of the rebuilding. The destruction here is a necessary stage. It is a soter amanat livnot, and that's what's going on. And that is why the Navi Zechariah also says that the fast days, Tzom Ravi'i, Tzom Chamishi, Tzom Shvi, Tzom Shvi, right? They will turn into happy days. They'll turn into festival days. Right? We could ask the question: the days which are currently fast days, in the future there will be complete redemption. We won't need to fast anymore. Okay, they should become ordinary days. No, they become festival days. Why? Because there is something about, we cannot recognize it now, but there is something about that destruction which is actually part of the rebuilding. That is the soter menat livnot. And that is what Rabbi Akiva understands. He sees the connection between these two. So he says that Shalom Kama Nevuato Shel Uriah, הייתי מתיירא שלא תקיים נבואתו של זכריה. עכשיו שנקיימה נבואתו של אוריה, בידוע שנבואתו של זכריה מתקיימת. So now that I have seen the nevuah of Uriah has taken place, now I've seen the nevuah of the destruction that has been fulfilled, so I know, biyadua, it is certain that nevuato shel Zechariah mitkayemet. I know that the prophecy of Zechariah will be fulfilled, and I always say that we have an advantage over Rabbi Akiva, that we in our days have seen very much. We have seen the fulfillment of the prophecy of Zechariah. We don't need to believe it, but right? We spoke about this on Yom Yerushalayim. We see this every day. It's not something we have to believe in anymore. It's something that we see and something that we experience. And then he says, Akiva nichamtanu. So say the other chachamim, they turn back to Rabbi Akiva and they say, Akiva nichamtanu, you have comforted us. Akiva nichamtanu, that is the double language of comfort. And that is the same as we have coming up to Tisha B'Av. Following Tisha B'Av, we have Shabbat Nachamu. And there again in the Gemara we have Nachamu Ami. It's also that double language of comfort. Just as there was Laktaba Kiflaim, we were struck down twice. The double language of the Churban. So we have the double language of Nechama, which comes afterwards as well. And now we say Hadran Alech Elo Elokin Aslik Alei Masechet Makkot. So a massive yashar koach to everybody. We have completed the Masechet.
Yashar koach to you.
Thank you.
Yashar koach.
So we're going to have a Siyum. Have to arrange that.